It's the biggest lie told millions of times across the internet every day. I have read the terms and conditions. We've all been there. You're signing up for a new account online, and there it is, the inevitable checkbox. I have read and agreed to the terms of service. But do you give it a second thought? Do you just check it and move on? Do you skip over it? Is it one of those times when the website makes you scroll through the entire thing before you can click the checkbox in advance? Anyhow, you're off to the next page, continuing through whatever you were doing before. But wait a moment, what did you actually just agree to? Which of your rights did you just sign away with a click? In 2015, academic researchers Jonathan Obar and Ann Oldorf Hirsch wanted to know just how many people actually read the terms and conditions, so they devised a scientific study. 543 participants were subjected to a survey where they proceeded through the sign-up process for a fictional social media website called NameDrop, which was designed to be similar to LinkedIn. Participants, of course, were subjected to an opportunity to read both the terms of service and the privacy policy of NameDrop before they signed up. The privacy policy alone was 7,977 words long. That would take an average reader over 30 minutes to read. The terms and conditions, about 3,000 words, so half as long, but still, that's 45 minutes of reading total. You might not be surprised to know that 74% of participants skipped reading the terms entirely. That means they just opted to quick register, just move right along. And of those who did read the terms and privacy policy, the terms were only read for an average of 51 seconds, with a few exceptions. Okay, so 74%, that's not bad, right? Well, there was another interesting aspect of this study. Deep in the terms of service, Obar and Oldorf Hirsch included two gotcha clauses, things that were designed to induce a shock factor when people found out they had agreed to them. One of those permitted NameDrop to hand over any and all of each user's data to any third-party organization. They in fact specifically mentioned the National Security Agency in the clause. They said, "We will probably have to hand your data over to the NSA." Now, most of us may not have flinched at this one. If we're not used to the NSA possibly having access to our data at this point, that's just part of American life. In fact, only one of the participants of the study mentioned the NSA by name in their post-study evaluation. But the second clause, I'm just going to read it to you. It said, quote, "All users of this site agree to immediately assign their firstborn child to NameDrop Incorporated," end quote. And that, quote, "all individuals assigned to NameDrop automatically become the property of NameDrop Incorporated, no exceptions," end quote. No exceptions. You signed your firstborn over to NameDrop. 98% of all the participants in these studies missed these clauses, completely overlooked them, and thus Obar and Oldorf Hirsch are now in possession of many children, which they may now raise as participants for their future studies. Okay, no, that's definitely not true, but still, in this case, it was just a research study. Other times, companies have actually placed clauses in their terms of service to see for themselves how much attention people actually give to the terms. Earlier this year, in fact, a Florida woman won $10,000 when she read the fine print of a travel insurance policy she purchased, which offered the prize to the first person who responded to an email address that was, of course, embedded deep in the terms. In 2017, 22,000 people in England unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, agreed to 1,000 hours of community service in exchange for free public Wi-Fi access, after the company providing the service inserted the clause to raise consumer awareness. There are many other news items about strange or interesting terms of service clauses, and thanks to NPR for reporting the ones I just mentioned. You can find a link to that piece in our show notes today. But how did we arrive at this place where we just haphazardly agree to documents we haven't even read? Have things always been this way? In this podcast, we're going to go back quite a bit to try to understand why we enter into these agreements. And we're going to look at if modern terms of service are truly detrimental or a necessary evil. I hope you'll stick around.
We do have a clause within our terms of service.
I think average users
read the terms of service and the updates that are very frequently sent to us.
You know, we are in a societal debate, as we should be, about information practices.
We want people to be able to both review terms of service agreements and privacy policies, and we want them to discuss what they mean, so it creates this type of feedback loop.
When we talk about privacy, is it possible in the 21st century?
You said you agreed when you signed up, so now what? I'm Ethan Smith, and as we'll find out, terms and conditions apply. So I am unashamedly a citizen of the United States of America, and if you're an American like me, you'll probably vaguely recall names like Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, maybe from your American history class in high school. Various flavors of these guys' ideologies may be found woven among the writings of the American founding fathers, who ultimately enshrined Locke's inalienable rights doctrine in the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The American experiment introduced the modern concept of a government which derived its power from the consent of those it governed, thus binding the populace and the government within a social contract. Now, a social contract is a written or unwritten agreement between individuals and the state. Individuals agree to give up portions of their freedoms in submission to a governing body, and in exchange, that same governing body protects the remaining rights of these individuals. Now, John Locke proposed this idea in great length in his Second Treatise of Government, published in 1763. Here's an excerpt from that.
But though men, when they enter into society, give up the equality, liberty, and executive power they had in the state of nature into the hands of the society, to be so far disposed of by the legislative as the good of the society shall require, yet it being only with an intention in every one the better to preserve himself, his liberty and property.
And it goes on, you get the idea. We only submit to the government in order to protect our liberty and property. Now, this is not a new idea. Plato wrote of similar concepts in The Republic, but it nevertheless is an important concept that's relevant to modern society. If individuals believe their government has violated the social contract, they, may want to take action. This has traditionally occurred at the ballot box, where citizens may vote to remove any transgressing representatives. However, as time has passed and political landscapes have shifted dramatically, it could be argued that adjustments to campaign finance and voting laws have limited this citizen action. But we'll save the political discussion for another podcast, and there are probably plenty of them out there that discuss that, so give it a search and check them out. The point is here that when two parties enter into a social contract, one hopes that it is mutually beneficial. That is, everyone gains something. Now, contracts have existed as long as there have been laws to enforce them. Often contracts are spelled out to assure the existence of a record of a deal. Other times they're introduced to mitigate a lack of trust between the individuals who must come to an agreement. Nevertheless, before the digital age, for each agreement, there was always a hard copy of a contract. Now, whether that was fresh off the printing press or still hot from the Xerox machine, contracts could be physically intimidating. This is often portrayed in film and television. You might remember a scene where a character walks into the room carrying a massive stack of papers and thumps them down on the table in front of some others. The other characters stand there wide-eyed looking at this stack of papers and then proceed to go through and sign an initial in various places, marked often by flags, while hearing a synopsis of the entire stack from a lawyer speaking in legalese standing by. Now, the invention of the PDF file certainly has changed the way we read huge documents. Consider the implications of distributing a physical copy of the recent 448-page Mueller report to every member of the United States Congress. That's almost 240,000 sheets of paper. But the rise of the World Wide Web and digital technology have led to the propagation of something we're all familiar with now: extremely long and cumbersome terms and conditions. To illustrate, let's consider something that most of us are familiar with: Facebook's terms of service. Facebook launched for United States college students in 2004. Now, the earliest version of their terms of service I could find was from October 3rd, 2005, and it weighs in at just over 1,900 words, and that's about 4 single-spaced pages of 12-point Times New Roman font. The current Facebook terms of service? Well, it's a bit more complicated. The basic terms page is now about 3,200 words, so that's 6 pages of text now, which doesn't seem like a huge jump until you realize that this is just one of many terms and conditions pages that Facebook has now because it offers so many services. As the company has expanded over the years to include more features, the terms and conditions have ballooned. You can see this for yourself. Just go to facebook.com/legal/terms. It's all there. Now, of course, I've singled out Facebook here, but this happens frequently. In 2000, Amazon.com's terms of service were just over 700 words. Now they're 3,300. In 2004, Wikipedia offered just a simple disclaimer about the validity of information and just a few sentences about copyright. The terms of use there didn't come until 2009. You get the picture. The nature of the World Wide Web caused these contracts to appear much more frequently. Every website, app, game, or software application you use, even the software I'm using to record this podcast right now, has a terms and conditions page somewhere. Just scroll down to the bottom of most pages or tap the settings icon if you're on mobile, and you'll see a link to terms. These terms are, in their simplest form, what you as a user agree to by using a service offered by a website or company. Think of them like house rules. When you visit a friend's home for dinner, it's understood that you don't start a food fight. Sometimes the rules are understood, but others are offered by your host. Perhaps they want you to remove your shoes or hat. Ultimately, if you want to stick around, you have to play by the rules. And so now we've looped all the way back around again to the idea of a social contract. Two entities, usually an individual and an online company or service. The company wants to offer the individual a unique service. The individual wants to partake. The agreement is literally defined by the company's terms of service. And if you recall, a social contract involves an individual sacrificing a right or set of rights in order to obtain a service. Never has this been more relevant than in the digital age. More on that right after this. With the rise of social media, the word social in social contract takes on an entirely different meaning. If you use any form of social media, you've entered into one of these contracts with a large company. The company offers you usually a free use of their service. All they ask is that you agree to their terms of use. I keep coming back to Facebook, mainly because of its ubiquity, but also because the layout of its most recent terms of service read like a social contract. First, what they, Facebook, provide for you. This is directly from their terms of service. Quote, a personalized experience, connections to others, introductions to other products and services, and a safe environment for you to share content. End quote. Sounds great, so what's the second half? What do you, the user, have to give in exchange? Well, the short answer here is privacy. In addition to terms and conditions, most websites have what's called a privacy policy. The second main section of Facebook's terms and conditions states, quote, to provide these services, we must collect and use your personal data. We detail our practices in the data policy, which you must agree to in order to use our products, end quote. Now, if you click on data policy in that sentence, it's a link. It takes you to an entirely new page, which gives information about what data Facebook collects and how they use your data. Now, this is no different on Twitter, YouTube, Amazon, Instagram, Snapchat, all of these services. By using them, you agree to their terms. And the most upfront thing you'll find in their terms is that they are going to obtain every piece of information about you that they can in order to provide you with other opportunities, or so they say. Most websites record your IP address, which is a unique identifier based on your physical location. And thanks to smartphones, GPS, and routers, it's not uncommon for your location to be accurate within a few meters. Just give that one a quick Google. Websites are also aware of what links you click and even how much time you spend looking at certain parts of their pages. It's all spelled out. Facebook clearly states, quote, we collect information about how you use our products, such as the types of content you view or engage with, the features you use, the actions you take, the people or accounts you interact with, and the time, frequency, and duration of your activities.
On Facebook, you have control over your information. The content that you share, you put there. You can take it down at any time. The information that we collect, You can choose to have us not collect. You could delete any of it. And of course, you can leave Facebook if you want.
The voice you just heard is Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook. And he's absolutely right. While it seems trivial that you could just delete your Facebook account if you don't like what they're doing, many times we forget that most of the information Facebook has on each of its users is originally provided by the user. And on the platform, we choose who we want to share the information with by controlling who our friends are and adjusting the visibility of each post. Regardless of each post's privacy settings, however, Facebook still collects the data from you so they can use it to, according to the terms of service, enhance your experience. But what happens when those data show up in the hands of a third party, one you haven't authorized? In April of 2018, Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg appeared before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee. The clip of his voice earlier came from that hearing. So why was he there? Well, it's a bit of a long story, but I'm going to do my best to tell it because I think it's important for this discussion. Just before the 2016 United States presidential election, an academic researcher from Cambridge University named Alexander Kogan began a scientific study that acquired data from users via an app connected to Facebook. His team developed an algorithm from the information that users provided that attempted to profile those users. Now, according to Kogan, the algorithm and the model they tried to develop just did not work. It did not produce the result they were looking for. So, what's the big deal? It's just a failed scientific study, right? The problem was that a company called Cambridge Analytica had funded Kogan's study. And once it was over, much of the data collected by the study, as well as the algorithm developed by the team, was sold to the Ted Cruz campaign by Cambridge Analytica during the campaign cycle preceding the 2016 United States presidential election. Once Cruz left the race following a primary defeat, the algorithm was acquired by the Trump campaign. When the news about this exchange went mainstream after the election, people went insane. Outrage erupted from both sides of the political aisle in Congress, from the news media, from regular users on Facebook, and so we ended up with exchanges like this between U.S. senators and Mark Zuckerberg in the hearings that would follow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, would you be comfortable sharing with us the name of the hotel you stayed in last night?
No.
If you've messaged anybody this week, would you share with us the names of the people you've messaged?
Senator, no, I would probably not choose to do that publicly here.
I think that may be what this is all about. Your right to privacy, the limits of your right to privacy, and how much you give away in modern America in the name of, quote, connecting people around the world. A question basically of what information Facebook's collecting, who they're sending it to, and whether they ever asked me in advance my permission to do that. Is that a fair thing for a user of Facebook to expect?
Yes, Senator. I think everyone should have control over how their information is used.
Now, this exchange goes on, and Zuckerberg once again reiterates the importance of users being able to determine who exactly is going to see their content. But that distinction isn't what led to Senator Durbin asking this line of questioning. Let's step back to the Cambridge Analytica scandal, if you can call it that. At least they didn't add gate to the end. Everyone who originally participated in Kogan's study agreed to participate and was compensated. So again, they agreed, for a small amount of money, to sacrifice the privacy of the data that they provided to the app, which, once again, was authorized through their Facebook accounts. The problem was that in addition to collecting information about the users who authorized it, the app also collected information about the friends of the users who participated. Cue the outrage. About 270,000 people participated in the initial study, but through the accounts of those users, Cambridge Analytica gained access to the information of over 87 million other Facebook users without their consent. I was actually one of these users. Evidently, one of my Facebook friends participated in the study, so at the time, yes, I remember being a little bit annoyed and maybe even angry. But did I have a right to be? Following the Cambridge Analytica incident, Facebook promised to close the loophole that allowed the secondhand information access. And that's great. But it takes us back to the premise of this show, agreeing to the terms of service. As it turns out, users waive their right to be upset about their data being shared when they signed up for Facebook in the first place. Facebook's terms of service in 2016 stated, quote, "When you download or use such third-party services, they can access your public profile, which includes your username or user ID, your age range and country/language, your list of friends, as well as any other information that you share with them," end quote. Now, it's not entirely clear that by having access to your list of friends, the third parties would then gain access to all of your friends' information, but Facebook's current data policy has changed. It no longer includes the phrase, "your list of friends," in the previous sentence I just read. Instead, it adds another sentence after that states, quote, "Apps and websites you use may receive your list of Facebook friends if you choose to share it with them. But apps and websites you use will not be able to receive any other information about your Facebook friends from you or information about any of your Instagram followers." And in parentheses, "although your friends and followers may, of course, choose to share this information themselves," end quote. And there's one more sentence after that I just can't help reading. It says, "Information collected by these third-party services is subject to their own terms and policies." Not this one. Now, I honestly feel like I could just end the show right there because that pretty much sums up the whole point of what I'm talking about. But what have we really learned here? Facebook did indeed self-regulate following the Cambridge Analytica incident. But would they have made these changes if the scandal hadn't made the news? Perhaps not. Their terms of service, which again all users must agree to use Facebook in the first place, clearly allowed for the data sharing. And it was likely in their interest as a business to continue sharing those data. In the failure, or rather absence, of privacy protections in the contract made between Facebook and its users, the United States Congress held hearings in order to honor its side of the social contract between the government and the American people. That's right, 243 years after the Declaration of Independence, the US government is still, at least for appearance's sake, trying to protect the freedoms of its citizens. And they even managed to do it in a bipartisan manner. Just go listen to some of the hearings. Earlier, you heard a question from Senator Durbin, a Democrat from Illinois. I want you to listen to another clip from that same hearing.
One way to regulate a company is through competition, through government regulation. Here's the question that all of us got to answer. What do we tell our constituents, given what's happened here, why we should let you self-regulate? What would you tell people in South Carolina that, given all the things we've just discovered here, it's a good idea for us to rely upon you to regulate your own business practices?
Well, Senator, my position is not that there should be no regulation.
Okay.
I think the internet is
Do
increasingly
you embrace
important.
regulation?
I think the real question, as the internet becomes more important in people's lives, is what is the right regulation, not whether there should be or
But you
not.
as a company welcome regulation?
I think if it's the right regulation, then yes.
You think the Europeans have it right?
I think that they get things right.
Have you ever submitted? That's true. So would you work with us in terms of what regulations you think are necessary in your industry?
Absolutely.
The senator asking the questions? It's Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina. My point here is this. Whether it's a social contract or agreeing to a company's terms of service, we should be aware of what we're sacrificing and weigh the costs and benefits. We've established that with the U.S. government, citizens pay taxes and expect to have their freedoms protected as part of the social contract. And you arguably have more to gain from entering into the contract than the government does, mainly because the government couldn't exist without the agreement. But when it comes to large companies, while you do gain access to some potentially exciting services, it turns out the companies have much more to gain than you do when you agree to their terms of service. And it all starts with advertising. That's next time on Terms and Conditions Apply. Terms and Conditions Apply is written and produced by Ethan D. Smith. If you'd like more information on the topics presented in this episode, be sure to visit the links in the show notes, which include the full research study by Obar and Oldorf Hirsch, Mark Zuckerberg's Senate testimony, and the article from NPR I mentioned about other interesting terms and conditions. If you want to learn more about the Cambridge Analytica incident, you can listen to a recent episode of the podcast Against the Rules, hosted by best-selling author Michael Lewis, where he talks to Alex Kogan about the scandal. That link is also in the show notes. The theme music for this podcast is composed by Lee Rosevere, and other music you heard is composed by Kevin MacLeod. The tracks are used under Creative Commons 4.0 and 3.0 licenses, respectively. The end credit theme you hear now is performed by Josh Lippy and the Overtimers. You can find links to more from all three artists in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with your friends, whether that's in person or on social media. And once again, I'm Ethan Smith, and I'll meet you back here for the next episode.